From the Liberal Democrats, Member of Parliament for Inverness, Nairn, Badenoch and Strathspey, which is a very beautiful and very long constituency title. Please welcome a very tall, Right Honourable Danny Alexander MP.
I don't know how old you are, but I've been a Liberal for 42 years, since I was 6 months old, on the island of Colonsay. And my mother caught my grandfather rocking my pram, saying, "Repeat after me, I'm a member of the Liberal Party." But I came into political consciousness as a teenager in the Highlands with the great Liberal Russell Johnson as my MP. And his liberalism, as mine, was based on the understanding and the belief that people do better when they work together, and that when barriers between them are taken down. Nationalism is fundamentally about building barriers between people. Liberalism is about taking those barriers down. It goes against the tide of history, as Brian was explaining in his speech, to build up these barriers on this small island. And so this matters enormously. I think this is the most important vote any of us will ever cast in our lifetimes, no matter what comes after us, because the decision we make will be irreversible. The decision we make is forever. There will be no going back. So breaking up the United Kingdom is not just backward-looking and illiberal. It has consequences too. Consequences in many areas of our lives. But I want to talk, given that I'm Chief Secretary to the Treasury as well, about the economic consequences. We've heard, George wasn't going to mention that, well there we are, I've revealed that secret to you all this evening. Ronald has spelt out some of those consequences, but this week too those consequences have been spelt out in an avalanche of economic news, under which the economic case for independence has been permanently buried. This news has brought, I think, home to everybody the huge risks that we'll be taking with our economy and with our prosperity if we vote for independence, and gives a hint, but actually just the barest hint, of what would happen. And each of these things has nailed a key lie in the Yes campaign. So let me engage in what I like to call Project Fact for a few minutes. First this week we heard about the oil and gas industry. We heard from Sir Ian Wood, who built up a business in the North Sea over many, many decades, and whose experience and strength makes him one of the most respected figures in that industry. And he talked about the resources that are likely to be left in the North Sea and the revenues that might be generated from them. And of course this is important because hyper-optimistic projections for oil revenues are one of the bases of the whole nationalist argument. And he spelt out why, in his view, the amount of oil we can get out of the North Sea, 16.5 billion barrels, which is way less than the nationalists estimate in their white paper, is likely to be more realistic. And he said too about why that would mean that we'd have to accept lower taxation, because those resources are in the more inaccessible, more costly to explore parts of the North Sea, and so it will take more investment to get that oil out from under the sea. And of course we all want to get the most oil and gas out of the North Sea. None of us thinks that oil and gas is a burden, but we have to be realistic about what we can yield from it. And on the basis of his figures, and they're not dissimilar to the ones that Professor MacDonald has just outlined, instead of being able to pay for all the pie-in-the-sky promises that the nationalists have put into their white paper, we'd instead have a large and growing budget deficit in an independent Scotland. And you don't just have to look at the forecast, if you look at what's just happened in the last 2 or 3 years. In the last 2 years, the actual amount of tax that we received from the North Sea is about £3 billion lower than the SNP forecast 2 years ago. And they like to attack the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is the independent body that does economic forecasting now in the UK, as being pessimistic. And yet, in fact, in the last 2 years, the actual amount of revenue we've had from the North Sea has been lower than the OBR forecast. So they, in fact, have been optimistic, and yet they are attacked by the nationalists for being pessimistic. Now you might say, well, why does this all matter? It matters enormously because it is absolutely fundamental to the resources that we would have if we were independent, if we were a separate state, to pay for the public services that we cherish, like the National Health Service, because the reality would be pretty brutal. We'd start with a larger deficit. I think everybody pretty much now accepts that. We'd see higher interest rates, higher debt repayments, as a simple fact of starting out life as a new state on the international scene. With less oil, that gap gets wider and wider, that deficit gets wider and wider year after year. The Institute for Fiscal Studies say that would mean an extra 6 billion cuts in the first year alone. It could only be afforded with massive tax rises and big spending cuts year after year. Now, as Chief Secretary to the Treasury over the last 2 years, I know something about this, as you all do too. But I have to say, looking at the challenges that we face in independent Scotland, what we've had to do over the last 4.5 years would be a tea party by comparison. And I don't want that to happen in independent Scotland. I don't want that to happen in this country at all. And the only way to stop it is to say no thanks to independence next Thursday. In the UK, we have stable, secure resources. We share our resources, we pool them across this United Kingdom. We help ourselves through economic ups and downs. That's what we'd be sacrificing if we vote for independence next week. And then the second piece of news we had this week was from the banks, who said to us that independence would simply be too risky for them to remain here. This is not a decision that was taken lightly by those institutions, some of whom had been located in Scotland for 200 years or more. Their commitment to this country not in doubt. And yet Alex Salmond, extraordinarily for a supposedly responsible politician, dismissed this and said it's all about brass plates. Well, the only brass plate around this week was the brass plate being nailed onto the coffin of the economic case for independence by the news that we heard. And this matters, it really matters. It matters for jobs. It matters for jobs in the short term in those industries. It matters for jobs in the long term, because as control of companies moves overseas, so the jobs gradually will follow them. And in a crisis, as many European countries learned their costs over the last few years in the Eurozone, when all of your financial institutions are based in some other country, the consequences for you are much, much worse, because they're regulated in another country. They have to follow the interests of that other country. Yet that is the prescription being offered to us by the nationalists. And I have to say, we have at the moment in the United Kingdom the strongest economic recovery anywhere in the developed world. We are creating jobs in this country at a rate not seen anywhere else in Europe, in very few other countries in the world at the moment. I don't think we should run away from that recovery and run away from the United Kingdom when what we have to offer, is what we have to face under independence, is so much worse. And then thirdly this week, we heard from some retailers. George mentioned it in his introduction. A number of major retailers making the obvious basic economic point that when you have higher costs in a more costly environment, and of course Scotland being a large country, the distribution costs are higher, and you become a separate state, and those costs are no longer shared across 60 million consumers, but instead are shared across 5 million consumers, then prices will go up. Now, I suspect John Lewis may not be that worried about the threat of a boycott from Jim Sillars. I don't know if Jim Sillars shops at John Lewis. But it is important, because this is about the cost of living for every single man, woman and child in Scotland. And it's not just about prices in the shops. We know too, the cost of your mortgage would rise under independence because interest rates would go up. We know that other prices would rise, prices for loans, prices for credit cards. All of those things in a shrunken state with a smaller economy with higher costs would go up. If that's what you want to vote for it. But I don't fancy it for my fellow countrymen, I don't fancy it for the next generations either. And then we also saw a few days ago, in response to just one opinion poll, not a real decision, just one opinion poll suggesting the referendum might go the wrong way. We saw a fall in the stock market that wiped £2.6 billion off the value of 11 of Scotland's largest companies. That's £400 for every man, woman and child in Scotland. Now again, some people might say, well, that's just the stock market, these are just numbers, what does it matter? Well, those stock market valuations are the valuations that stand behind your pension. They're the valuations that stand behind employment in Scotland. And those things will be threatened if That tremor that we saw in the financial markets became the earthquake of independence, and we should not want that for Scotland either. Especially when you look at what we have in the United Kingdom, and what we can have in the United Kingdom in future. A stronger Scotland, a stronger economy firstly, part of this strong economic recovery that we're seeing across the United Kingdom. Real job creation, real investment, real economic growth, not something we should run away from. And then you look at not just a stronger economy, but a stronger parliament for Scotland too. More powers guaranteed for Scotland, for Scotland's parliament, if we vote no next week. I'm a Liberal Democrat. We've been dreaming about federalism in the Liberal Democrats for 100 years. Now, it may have taken a while to move from Mr Gladstone's vision of home rule all round to genuine federal solution for Scotland within the United Kingdom. But I can tell you, that is now just one vote away. A real parliament with power and control over our domestic affairs and financially independent too with tax-raising powers. That is the real offer. That is real change for Scotland. Change that is safe, change that is secure, change that will be delivered more quickly. Vote no and you are saying yes to more powers for a Scottish Parliament within the strength and stability of the United Kingdom. Now, of course, I've talked a bit about economics. Partly because that's what I do in the government. But this isn't just about economics, it's about who we are. I'm a Highlander. I'm proud of being a Scot. I'm a Brit. I'm a European too. I'm married to an Englishwoman whose mother comes from Gibraltar, so my goodness, we've got every aspect there. But when I think of what this country means to me, one image in particular sticks in my mind, because as a schoolboy, I lived in Glengarry, travelled to school at Lochaber High School in Fort William. The bus journey back and forward every day for 6 years took me past the Commando Memorial at Spian Bridge. I don't know how many of you have seen it. See a few heads nodding. And if you think about what that memorial stands for, it recognises the contribution of young men from Scotland, from England, from Wales and from Northern Ireland, who came to the glens of Scotland to train for the mission of their lives, for the liberation of Europe. And the epitaph on that memorial is the phrase, "United we conquer." Couldn't have put it better. Because I believe that if we stay united, then working together, we can strive to conquer our nation's ills and build a stronger and fairer society in Scotland and across the United Kingdom that I think we all in this hall want to see. There will be nothing strong or fair about a separate Scotland. So let's say, politely but firmly, no thanks next Thursday.